Just kidding. Only 3 of these are actually Riley Sager books because I don't own all of them. So I have officially done it. I have read every single Riley Sager book. I never really went out of my way to do that. I had just read so many and then I only had 2 left in his bibliography. And I was like, let me read all of them. Even though one of them I probably would never have picked up. I still don't really know why I decided to read all of them because they're not all worthy of being read, in my opinion. But in honor of Riley Sager's new book coming out in June, I thought I would do a ranking of all of his books in case you want to read some of his books before his new release, or if you want to find out if he's the author for you, or just hear my thoughts and a little bit of a rant about Riley Sager himself. This year, I'm actually celebrating his new book because for the first time ever, we have a male protagonist. The book is called Middle of the Night and it comes out on June 18th. Sounds sponsored. It's definitely not, but he in every other book always has a female protagonist, and now is the first time that he is writing a male protagonist, at least under his pseudonym, pen name, Riley Sager, because as we know, that is not his real name. His real name is Todd Ritter, and he chose Riley Sager specifically because it was a gender neutral name, and I think he wanted to appeal to more female audiences, not only with his new genderless name, but also by writing female protagonists. I did read that he, under his real name, Todd Ritter, had some books that didn't do very well, so he wanted to rebrand, come up with a new name, and start, re-releasing some books or releasing newer books. And it worked, obviously, because everyone reads Riley Sager now. Personally, it kind of weirds me out a little bit that he is a male and he has a feminine sounding name, like author name, and then only writes from the perspective of women. Like, something about that is a little bit weird to me, but I've read all of his books, so who am I to really talk, right? Now, his books are what I like to call popcorn thrillers, and they are the perfect book in between, like, more intense or, like, better writing books that really take an effort to read through. You know what I mean? Like, his writing style is not very good. Like, to me, it's not great writing where I like want to highlight and annotate everything. It's not like that, but they're still so entertaining that they always get me out of a reading slump, and they go so fast. Like, they're so fast paced. They're very, very digestible books no matter what. So even if they're bad, they're still like entertaining, and I don't really want to put them down. Also, he writes a great twist. What can I say? They don't all work for me, and I love some that people hate and vice versa. It doesn't always work for everyone. When you write a dramatic twist in your book, of course it's not going to be for everyone. But many times have I been blindsided in a Riley Sager book, which is just entertainment. It's entertainment, pure entertainment. You know how you watch like a bad movie every now and again that's like cheesy, not well done, not well acted or anything, but it's just fun. It's just for a fun time, and that's what Riley Sager books are to me. I will say though, the thing that I've discovered with Riley Sager is the more and more you read his work, no matter what order of books you read them in, you enjoy them less and less because you figure out his formula very early on. And I always say the first Riley Sager book you read is going to probably be your favorite, unless you start with the 2 in the bottom category in this video, because I don't think those are great. There are 2 books in his bibliography where he kind of goes off of that formula, and one of them is one of my favorite books of all time, which is so wild to me that a Riley Sager book is one of my top 5 books, and I do need to reread it. But there are times where he goes off script and off his usual formula, so I would start with those personally because you're going to enjoy them a lot more before you figure out his traditional formula in the rest of his books. Now, there will be a little bit of a rant at the end of this video that includes some spoilers for some of the books, and I'll warn you which books I want to talk about and spoil just in case. But just to expose his formula just a little bit, or at least one thing that he does that's like really irritating to me that I can never talk about because it's always a spoiler, but it annoys me so much and I always want to talk about it. So I'm going to do that at the end, and I'll give one example and it'll spoil a book, but I have to get it off my chest, okay? So he has written a book every single year since 2017, so let's finally jump into my ranking of every Riley Sager book. We're gonna go from worst to best, okay? We're going to start with his worst books. Now, in my opinion, his worst book is very well loved in the book community, and that is Final Girls. I was recommended this so much back in the day, and I don't like this book at all. I gave it 2 stars, which probably could be less than that. So this follows a girl named Quincy, and she was the sole survivor of a massacre, and there were 2 other women who were also final girls of their own massacre that reach out to her and try to help Quincy like remember the events that took place, and it's kind of her figuring out what actually happened the night of the massacre because she has no memory of it. That's convenient, right? Mostly I just hated the characters. I don't like the characters in this at all. The way, sometimes when Riley Sager writes women, it's not great. They're just not believable women all the time. You know, they're really stupid, or I'm just really being harsh right now. They're just dumb sometimes. I just always question the choices. There are exceptions to this, of course, and we'll get to that in the best books of his, because again, I love his good books. The good ones are really good. But this is some of the worst character writing, and I always questioned their motives and their decisions. Like when a character is just dumb, I can't get past that. That's not believable. It's not believable decisions that someone would actually be making if they were in this scenario. And not every book needs to be believable, because let me tell you, some of his twists are out there, okay? And I can forgive that. But the characters in this, now, this kind of reads like a whodunit, you know, it's like a slasher. A lot of his books are like thriller mysteries, and you're trying to figure out who is the antagonist at the end of the day, you know what I mean? Just a very true popcorn thriller, trying to figure out who the murderer is, you know, just very classic whodunit. And again, this is the book that does that thing that I absolutely cannot stand, and I've realized I can't stand it in any media because there is a show out right now that does it, and I hate it. I can't stand it. It's like one of my worst tropes. Anyway, but it's a spoiler, so save it for my rant. I mostly read Riley Sager for the tension and the entertainment factor, and this was just dragging on and on. It didn't work for me. The tension in this and the suspense element was not effective for me in this book, and I just really did not want to finish it. And it's funny because I read this right after I read my favorite book from him. So I was blindsided by this book. I was like, do I like Riley Sager? Because the first book I ever read from him, 5 stars. And then this, I was like questioning everything. I was like, was his writing actually good? Like, do I remember it properly? Also, this might seem a little bit familiar because Grady Hendrix also wrote a book called The Final Girls Support Group, and Riley Sager accused him of copying his idea. He later apologized and reached out to Grady Hendrix and apologized. So, you know, that's kind of dealt with, but I just wanted to throw that out there because a lot of people compare the two. I actually own Final Girls Support Group, but after reading this, I'm like, I don't think I like that idea anymore, so I haven't read it. I own it, haven't read it. Let me know if it really is better than this, because this was just not my jam at all. And I love horror movies. You know, I love a good final girl trope. I love final girls. He didn't do what I needed him to do with it in this, and I'm really nervous to read Grady Hendrix because I don't actually really like Grady Hendrix writing either. I did not like My Best Friend's Exorcism. I did like Horror Store, and then I also have How to Sell a Haunted House. I just bought this one, so I'm hoping I can get into a little bit of Grady Hendrix here soon because I enjoy Horror Store, but again, I'm a little nervous because I did not like My Best Friend's Exorcism. I don't love camp. I don't like campy in my books. Anyway, this is the worst one in my opinion, and that's all I gotta say about it. It's bad. To me, it's bad. I know a lot of people love this. Next up, we have Survive the Night. Also gave it 2 stars. I thought I would actually enjoy this one. Everyone was saying like how bad it is. Do not read it. Don't read Survive the Night. Don't do it. Don't subject yourself to it. I was getting so many warnings on Instagram when I was talking about reading all his books. They're like, just, you can skip that one. Like, don't bother. So this is set in the 90s, and it follows a girl named Charlie who meets a man at a rideshare board, and he offers to drive her home in like the middle of the semester because her best friend was just killed. And would you get in a car? I'm already getting into a rant, sorry. Meanwhile, obviously there's a serial killer at large, and as the drive goes on, she starts to suspect the man that she agreed to get a ride from, and she figures out that he's lying about a lot of things. Gee, who would have thought? Who would have thought with a serial... This is the most infuriating book I've ever read. Or actually, I listened to it through an audiobook from my library. And thank God it was free, because oh my God, this book made me so mad for the decisions that the character makes. This is what I mean by he writes stupid women. Like, what was she doing? Like, the book would never have taken place ever at all to begin with, okay? Like, how a character can be dumb every step of the way, like throughout the entire book, is beyond me. Up until the very last second of the page. Like, the reason why it's ranked a little bit higher is because I did actually enjoy the listening process of this book, just because it was fun. I would listen to this while I went on walks with my daughter, and I would just be doing this all the time when I'm like out walking, pushing the stroller. I'm like, it was just a fun experience, I think, to listen to it in an audiobook. I'd recommend doing that so you don't waste your time. Like, do something else. If you're gonna read this book, do something else while you're listening to it, so you're just not wasting all your time reading this book, because it is his famously worst one for a reason. And the reason why, it's not even that she makes dumb choices throughout the entire book. It's the over-explaining, the minutes on end of just explaining and explaining why she's making this decision. Well, I can't do that because da-da-da-da-da. Or, you know, I wish I could just leave, but I can't because blah, blah, blah. And then the ending is where it completely lost me. I was, what are we doing? What are we To me, he's kind of like M. Night Shyamalan, where he has to throw in a good twist, and usually characters aren't really who they appear to be, right? There's misleading characters, unreliable narrators a lot of the time, which that is, you know, not my favorite thing either. The way he does it anyway. You are always questioning, like, who is who, and is this real? Like, can we trust the protagonist? Like, can we trust what's happening in her head and all this kind of stuff, right? Because either they have some kind of mental illness or, you know, intoxicated or, you know, stuff like that. But what he did with that in this one, so questionable. Again, it feels self-indulgent. I don't know why you would write it like that. It's just beyond me, the ending of this book. That is not where I thought it would go. I will say that was not predictable. Wasn't predictable. And that's, you know, I mean, everything leading up to the very end was predictable. I'm not gonna lie. But like, as far as where the story goes, you kind of know what's happening a lot of the time. Next up, we have Lock Every Door. I gave this 3 stars. This is fine. It's just fine. It's an okay book. It's his most meh book of all of them. So this follows Jules, who takes a job as an apartment sitter for a very wealthy person in this apartment building that's in a very nice part of New York, in Manhattan, I believe. But she's not allowed to spend too much time away from the apartment. She's not allowed to have visitors overnight or anything. She can't spend overnight away from the apartment. And she soon discovers that apartment sitters, including the one before her, often go missing in this apartment building. And of course, she begins to investigate and learn the history of the building's dark past. Worst tension out of all of his books, I would say, at least with Final Girls. Final Girls actually probably had some of the worst tension because I just hated where it went. At least with Survive the Night, that one even was more tense and more interesting than this one. This is like the most boring of all of them, in my opinion. I just don't love the setting in like a city, in this building. I just don't love it. It's not my kind of setting to begin with, and it was just not very tense at all to me. And I just wasn't invested in it. I feel like this deserves more of like a 2.5 stars, you know, just right in the middle. It was fine. Definitely not his worst book by any means. And a lot of what he does is like shoehorned in like romances or like would they won't they or like little crushes and things like that. And generally, I don't like any of that in my books. Like, I'd prefer everyone to just not be into anyone. I want no romance at all. 0, please. And you know, this has some of that. Every book has some of that. So it's just not for me. That's all I have to say about that. This is just a little bit boring. It's fine. It's fine. But I just don't have anything to say about it. Now we're going to get into the books that I actually like and enjoy and maybe would reread. Well, maybe not this next one. This next one is like right in the middle of like, do I love it or is it just fine? And that's House Across the Lake. I gave it 3 stars. It deserves 3 stars. It's just, it is what it is. It's fine. Another fine one, I would say. So this follows a woman named Casey who's mourning the death of her husband and kind of drowning in her sorrows. And she starts spying on the neighbors with her binoculars, and across the lake, she thinks that she sees the murder of the wife of the couple who lives across the street. Across the lake. The name of the book, House Across the Lake. Now, this is his most wild and different book out of all of his books, and it's not going to work for everyone. It almost would have worked for me if I read this one first. I honestly think I would have kind of liked this one a lot if I didn't already read his other books. I personally kept waiting for the twist to happen, you know, as he does. He just writes a twist in every single book, and sometimes more than one. Okay, so don't let that be a spoiler. Just because there's a twist does not mean that's the end of it all. Okay, there's always stuff going on that you don't expect regardless. And this one I kept waiting for that to happen because like that's just what to expect. And then something did happen. I was like, okay, then now let's explain that. Like, can we keep on going and, you know, waiting for another thing to happen, to another reveal, and it just didn't come. And I was like, oh, so that's it. That's what happened. Okay. I was just really thrown off by the twist in this. I didn't hate it, but it's just so different from what I'm used to with his books, because this is one of the more recent books that I read and one of the last ones that I read from him. So I'd read almost all his books by this point, and I was like kind of taken aback by where he decided to take the story on this one. This one does read and, you know, is very reminiscent of Woman in the Window. Loved that book. That book got me out of a reading slump. That book started it all, to be honest. That is the book that made me fall back in love with reading in like 2020 or so. So I loved that one. And it's very similar in the sense that, like, you know, she's commonly intoxicated, again, with that like unreliable narrator kind of, where you're questioning like what is it that she saw, or she's questioning like what she saw, was it real or not. But then, you know, it just takes a wild left turn that is just so unexpected. I will say leading up to all of it in the end was very entertaining. I find his strongest parts aren't even his endings. I just really like the way that he writes mundane things and the settings and the expositions of the stories and the characters and the suspense and all of it leading up to it. I love the build. Usually I love his build. The endings always hit or miss for me, but typically I enjoy the experience as a whole, regardless of if I love the ending or the twist or not. I think House Across the Lake is a good one to start with if you're not familiar with Riley Sager at all, because you'll get this one out of the way before you read any of his other ones, so you're not completely thrown off by anything that happens in this book, because it's very different for him. And I would recommend starting with his more different books, and I think you'd enjoy them more than going into his traditional formula books. So the next one is The Last Time I Lied, which I gave 3 stars. And this one follows Emma, who returns to Camp Nightingale, where 15 years prior, 3 of her friends went missing. And now she returns as a camp counselor, and 3 more girls go missing, and she is kind of suspected, and also she starts to unravel the truth of what actually happened 15 years ago, while also happening in present day, and like figuring out all of that mystery. Again, this is one of those that had me all the way up until the end. Until the end, it gets a little messy, and this is one where I liked the book a lot. It's why it's ranked higher, but I hated the twist on this one. And that's fine. The twist, it didn't completely ruin it for me, but it was not my favorite by any means. I didn't love the ending and where the story went in this one, and like the reveal, the twist, all of it. Wasn't a fan, but I loved everything leading up to this. But again, I love the way he writes his settings, his character developments, and like it's just like the mundane stuff too, the day-to-day of like them figuring out this mystery and like finding little clues here and there. Like I like all of that, and the way he does that. It's super, super easy to read and so fast and makes you not want to put it down. Something about the way he writes his chapters, and like it's just constantly turning the page. Like you just don't want to put it down. And this one's ranked a little bit higher than House Across the Lake, even though they're kind of comparable, I would say, in like losing me a little bit at the end, but loving the build. And I would probably reread both of these, but this is set in a summer camp, and I can't deny that I love a summer camp setting. I loved the setting of this, in the nature, the lake, and all of that. I mean, the House Across the Lake had that too. Obviously the lake has a lake too, you know, and the woods and all that. Again, that's one of the reasons why I liked it, was the setting itself. I loved most of his settings that he's done throughout his books. Okay, now we're gonna get into the top 2 Riley Sager books, which are my favorite 2 that he's ever written. Obviously, if you've read his books, you know which 2 are left. Both I've rated 5 stars, okay? So no 4 stars here. We just jumped straight from like 3-star, yeah, they're good, to 5 stars. So in second place, we have The Only One Left, and this is his most recent book. This follows Kit, who takes a job as a caretaker of Lenora Hope, who was accused of murdering her family. And the previous nurse that was taking care of her fled in the middle of the night. And so Kit is trying to figure out why she left. And also Lenora is kind of mute. She suffered multiple strokes, so she can't really communicate until Kit brings out a typewriter. And that's how she starts communicating with Lenora to find out what actually happened to her family. Now, this one was famously known for being the most twists he's ever put into any book. There's like 5 twists in this, okay? So again, you think you are suspecting something? No, you're not. And that does not work for some people, okay? Some of these twists are so out of left field that people hated it. Okay, I saw some TikToks about it. People did not enjoy this book because of how wild it got and how many twists he threw in there. Honestly, for no reason. Again, feels a little self-indulgent sometimes the way he writes these twists. For me, I absolutely loved this book. I liked everything about it. Well, I can't say everything. 1 or 2 of the twists I could have done without a couple of them. Like if he just left it at like the first 1 or 2, that's fine. But you know, just keeping up with the reveals and all this stuff, we don't need it. It wasn't necessary. I enjoyed the ride though. And that's all I could ask for from his books. That's all I want from his books, right? I don't read them because they're super realistic crime, anything like that. I read them for fun because they're fun books. And this is one I could not put down at all. Like I was just so invested in this, and I read this so fast. Like it was so entertaining the way this read. Again, not everyone loves it. It's not everyone's cup of tea by any means because of how wild it is. But again, the setting is great. I actually really like the characters in this one a lot. He doesn't do too many of his weird tropes that he throws in the other ones. Like it's not too in your face in the top 2 books of his that I like. Like when he doesn't include it, I'm into it. You know, like the romancy, like will they, won't they? I don't love that. And he doesn't really include that too heavily in this one. But The Only One Left, fun. It's just a fun book. Like if you just want a fun book to get you out of a reading slump, this one will do it. Whether you love it or hate it, I just feel like the tension and the things that happen are the way it transpires is just so entertaining. And then lastly, my favorite book of all time, well, by Riley Sager. It's in my top 5, I think. I have to reread it to really confirm that. It's been like 3 years since I read it. Home Before Dark. The Only One Left, of course. Well, not The Only One Left. That's literally a book. The only book of his left to talk about is The Only One Left. 5 stars. Immediately 5 stars as soon as I read this. So this one follows Maggie, who is returning to a house that she lived in temporarily when she was really little, and her family had to leave in the middle of the night suddenly, and she doesn't remember anything that really happens. And her dad wrote a memoir of, like a nonfiction memoir of what actually transpired in the house at the time, and he claims the house was haunted, and that's why they had to leave in the middle of the night, and she decides to go back to the house to renovate it. She, you know, redoes homes and things, and she starts experiencing strange things and is thinking maybe her dad wasn't lying after all, and that it, you know, actually might be haunted. The writing structure in this specifically is exactly why I like it, is because it jumps back and forth between the nonfiction book that her dad wrote and Maggie's present experiences. And I loved that writing of jumping between the two. It just worked so well for me. It's just one of those storylines and like books that I'm really jealous of. Like I wish I came up with this first, and like I wish I wrote this. And that's when I know I really love a book, is when I wish that I did it. Again, this is the first book I ever read from Riley Sager, and I stand by the fact the first one is probably going to be your favorite out of all of his books. I don't know why, it just, because of the formulas and things, you find out soon what he writes and what he doesn't write. And I just feel like the first one you go in with is probably going to end up being your favorite. And the setting in this is just perfection. The haunted house, Victorian house, it's just beautiful. And I just can't complain about this. Like, it is just really, really good. The twist was a little bit not what I was expecting in a really good way. And it worked for me. At first I was a little mad. but I got over it, and it turns out I really love it. So that is my ranking of all of the Riley Sager books, all 7 of them thus far. I'm really curious to see where Middle of the Night is going to fall. If you follow me on Instagram, I'll be sure to update you once I read that. But I'm very, very interested in another one of his books and how he writes from a male perspective. That'll be very interesting. So I want to do a quick little rant about him as an author that is going to be a spoiler specifically for Final Girls. Okay, so if you don't want to know or you haven't read that book yet, just don't watch the rest of this video, but definitely go check out Home Before Dark. So I don't think Riley Sager is like the worst male author to write women, you know? 2 examples of male authors that I really don't like how they write women is Joe Hill and Scott Thomas. I read Kill Creek and I read Heart-Shaped Box. Okay, Riley Sager isn't as bad as them, but he does this thing where he has the female protagonist kind of fall for or have a flirty relationship with someone who we are supposed to believe is the killer, or who actually does end up being the killer. And he does that in Final Girls. I can't stand that trope where the protagonist hooks up with, you know, literally just has sex with the killer. But we don't know that they're killer yet, and the girl doesn't know they're the killer yet, and they hook up, and then later find out that that's what happened. I hate that, personally. You know, enemies to lovers is one thing, okay? Don't mind that at all. Lovers to enemies? Gross. I hate it. I hate it. And in Fallout, that happens in Fallout in the first episode. And I hate it. I hate it so much. I don't know why. I can't stand it. But regardless, that's the only time he's ever done it where it's full on, like it fully goes to that kind of relationship and then we find out they're actually the killer. But he does always have us questioning, like, or have her, you know, being with the guy that might be the killer or ends up being with the guy who we thought was the killer. And it's like, can we not have them be together at all? Like, can we not have that at all? Like, I just don't like when he puts in romance at all in any of his books. And especially when they hook up and he's the enemy. Like, I don't like that. It's my #1 pet peeve when it comes to his books. And now I always suspect that, like, that's gonna happen in all of his books. Anyway, that's my quick little rant. I have to go, but what is your favorite Riley Sager book? And are you excited for his new one? Are you gonna read it? Let me know all your thoughts down below. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll talk to you soon.